First it comes together in the clouds, then it rains, running down the mountains and the hills to the plains, running in the stream beds and the rivers to the sea, lavishing its liquid life on you and me. Water is the spirit of the earth. Water is the cleansing of new birth. What is it worth?
We could electrify the planet several times over with one, solar by itself could do it. Wind by itself could do it. Ocean power, tidal and wave power could do it. So it's just a matter of action.
To what extent is that terminal diagnosis represent actually not an end, but a beginning, or a new beginning? And so it strikes me that in the course of the conference, we've talked about three different possibilities for that. One is a very personal tradition that has become, in my opinion, one of the most powerful spiritual movements of the last 2 or 3 generations. And I'm talking about the 12-step movement and its diagnosis of addiction and recovery. In the 12 steps, recovery begins at the point of terminal diagnosis. That is, at the point that an addict has to reckon with the fact that their addiction is terminal, or in the language of the Apostle Paul, the wages of sin are death. And only at the point that the addict reckons with the terminality of the pathology can the road to recovery and health begin. So that's kind of a personal paradigm that has been extremely powerful for the epidemic substance abuse that our culture generates, and that has been a path to liberation and healing for millions of people. And so I think we need to be asking, how does the language and the practices of addiction and recovery inform our struggle with what we can only call public addiction in our historical moment? The public addictions to fossil fuel, the public addictions to overconsumption, and so on. A second, perhaps more communal expression that's interesting to think about in this mix is that terrible moment that many of us experience when we're told that a loved one has a terminal disease. It's an existential moment of awakening. The question is that the end of the story, or is that the beginning of something? And in the last several generations, palliative care and hospice have become this incredible renewal movement, spiritual renewal, communal renewal, in which people come together in amazing ways around a terminal diagnosis of a loved one and rally to live life in a radically different way, where nothing is taken for granted anymore, where we understand that time is precious and limited, where the things that matter come to the fore, where the disciplines of attending to a dying body teach us about patience, teach us about deep spirituality, and so on. So the hospice movement has something to say to us, I think, about the terminal possibilities of our history as a pastoral and in fact renewing practice, a practice that actually gives life out of death. The third example that I named in our plenary was an interesting historical moment in U.S. history, well, world history, as interpreted by one of my most important mentors, a man by the name of Nelson Johnson, who's the director of the Beloved Community Center in Greensboro, North Carolina. And he talks about 1962, at the height of the Cold War, when it looked to many rational observers like we were on the brink of nuclear annihilation, mutual assured destruction. The policies and practices of two world superpowers were sort of deadlocked, heading toward this cliff. People such as Thomas Merton, the great Trappist observer of life, were looking at that as a kind of a terminal moment. And Nelson Johnson argues, an African-American pastor and veteran activist, he argues, and I'm persuaded that he's correct, that it wasn't Kennedy and Khrushchev who pulled us back from the brink. It wasn't any great policy initiative. It was the rise of the civil rights movement and the moral energy that that brought to the American experience and eventually around the world that infused a hopeless moment, a despairing moment, with the possibilities for life and betterment as a society. And indeed, excuse me, indeed distracted many Americans from the nihilism of the arms race in the Cold War and brought them into a struggle for humanization and for social renewal and regeneration. And Nelson claims that it was the moral energy of an oppressed community, of a marginalized community in the American experience, the African American community, coming out of its own apocalypse of slavery and then of Jim Crow America, that that infused the entire body politic with a hope, the kind of hope that King talked about in his "I Have a Dream" speech, the kind of hope that brought nuns and rabbis and young Episcopal seminarians down from the north to do voting rights registration in the South, and built on the foundation of faith the most consequential social movement in the history of the U.S. He says that's what saved us from the terminal diagnosis of the Cold War. Now, in none of these three examples I've given can we prove this, but by observation we can recognize that here are some experiences, both personal and political, of wisdom and power that we might want to start reflecting on and drawing on as we try to reckon with the potential of terminal diagnosis on some really macro realities.
We will not achieve, we will not come closer to a world of justice and earth care unless all people, excuse me, I won't say all people, unless we take our individual steps, and unless we make those changes in our lives that appear to make no difference. But the paradox is that they do. We won't come to a more just and sustainable world unless we take those steps that appear to have no impact. So the paradox is that they appear meaningless in the broader scene, but we won't get there without those small steps. At the same time, I really try to teach my students that our lifestyle changes, as you said, are deciding not to drink Coke because of the exploitation that it produces, or are deciding to ride bikes instead of cars, that we always need to link those to the more systemic changes. So see how our lifestyle changes can lead to and are connected to changes in public policy. I think an example would be in Seattle. The fact that more and more people started riding bikes has led to public policy that makes it safer to ride bikes and more convenient to ride bikes and less convenient to drive cars. But then those public policies have also influenced more and more people to be able to ride bikes. So I think I try to say that we link behavioral change to systemic change and see the connections constantly. And we see our individual actions as part of a whole cloud of witnesses of actions, and that their impact is not just what we do alone, but what we do as part of a broader body of people acting toward this vision that we hold. Well, one of the things I've tried to do is have my students take a product or an activity. It might be a cell phone, it might be eating sushi, and break down the social and ecological costs. Who is ultimately exploited in order for us to have that cell phone, or for ordering us to have that blouse or that tomato? So break it down. What are the social costs? What are the ecological costs? And I found that opened students' awareness greatly towards being able to be conscious, not to be conscious on a regular basis of what are the costs of the way we choose to live in such consumptive ways. But then I also realized that kind of created despair because, oh my God, everything I do has horrendous impact. So now the assignment is changed such that they have to spend more time in their presentation, a bigger space, on doing a second step. And the second step is using the frameworks and the ideas that we've learned in the class to say how those relationships of exploitation, be they of people or of the earth, could be changed. So what are the steps we would need to take as individuals and as a society to shift so that the things we were doing didn't have these kinds of social and ecological impacts or costs, so that people weren't being destroyed by mining the diamonds that go into people's rings or the minerals that go into cell phones. So what are the changes on many levels of life, the individual lifestyle life, the public policy level, the corporate level, the institutional level? What are the changes that could happen such that the relationships, the systemic exploitation that's woven into our lives could be unwoven? And that assignment has proven to be very, very powerful for students as they realize we use different frameworks that we've learned in class that are in the book on resisting structural evil. Some of those frameworks and those pathways for action, they play out in the assignment related to these products.
I agree with the people who say that the kind of crisis we face is a civilizational crisis and not just an environmental crisis, and that climate change changes everything, the terms of the world of which we're a part. If it changes everything, then everybody's got a part in addressing it. So whether you're a grandparent or whether you're a Sunday school teacher or whether you're a gardener or whether you're a plumber, what is it in your own skill set, to use the jargon, that you can bring to fashioning an alternative to the kind of way of life that continues to be destructive, namely global consumerism fueled by fossil fuels? So people ask me, what should I do? And I say, what is it you feel most strongly about that connects with what you can bring to this? If you're a business person, how is it that your business can green, or you can, I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I've got a company there, happens to be a solar power company, and they're employee owned. They have release time for their employees to do community service on pro bono, on helping people figure out what's a better use of energy. So, what is it that you really have both skills and passion for? You'll find a way, and everybody's got a part. So I don't say do this, do this, do this. I say follow your own responsibilities and capabilities. My wife and I are both a part of Master Gardeners in Santa Fe. And the people in Master Gardeners, they may or may not believe in climate change, but they love to garden. So we've got community projects on gardening. So people now are growing some of their own food, and kids in schools have their grade school gardens. And that's a contribution on the part of all these old gardeners, whether or not they're going to be lobbying on climate change issues when the legislature meets. That's the kind of thing.
In their liquid treasure, blooming out to show their pleasure. In their wisdom they were waiting, like a parable relating, spirits die without the raining. First it comes together in the clouds that it rains, running down the mountains and the hills to the plains, running in the stream beds and the rivers to the sea, lavishing its liquid life on you and me. Water is the spirit of the earth. Water is the cleansing of new birth. What is it worth?